Chairman sir, we've had a very good discussion today in the House about this legislation, and as you know, the Honorable Prime Minister's goal is to reform India, to transform India, and this legislation is one of those transformational building blocks that will actually be able to transform our economic landscape. And I'm very pleased today that as honorable members spoke, they recognize the transformational aspect of this legislation. The fact that we've been able to bring this transformational legislation to this august house, and I must say this is now the august house after the other house has become the Augusta house. So with this, to have been able to bring it to this august house, it's because of the hard work of many people who worked on this for a long period of time, notably Shri T.K. Vishwanathan, who of course shepherded the process of putting this legislation together. And then it was brought to the Joint Committee of Parliament, where 30 members worked very hard. There were 12 sittings. They provided many good recommendations, including among them the fact that we have to strengthen workmen's rights, that we have to consider cross-border insolvency, and that we need to also strengthen operational creditors. So these very excellent recommendations came from the Joint Committee. There are many members of that present here. I'd like to really thank them for what they did, and we've accepted all of their recommendations in toto, and they are of course in the report that was presented to Parliament. We had a number of excellent speakers who spoke, highlighted many facts today. I'm not going to get in my reply into most of the details of the legislation that was brought out very well by most speakers. I will take the short time that we have right now to just go into a few clarifications and just explain those in some detail. But before I get into that, I do want to recognize that Shri Pappu Yadav ji, आज हम लोगों ने उनकी एक नई रूप हम लोगों ने उनका देखा, एक नई भूमिका दिखाई उन्होंने, तो हम सब लोगों को उनको ये धन्यवाद देना चाहेंगे कि उन्होंने इस प्रकार से आज भाषण दिया।
लेकिन वो अंग्रेजी में बोल रहे थे,
एक नए रूप में देखा हम लोगों ने जो ये, if this is a transformational legislation, I want to just very quickly tell honorable members, Mr. Chairman sir, what is so transformational about it. First of all, what we've done is we've redressed the balance of power between promoters and creditors, broadly defined, including of course financial creditors, operational creditors, government and so on. So we've redressed that. That's a big transformation. We've gone from a situation, as many honorable members pointed out, where the winding up and resolution process can last from 3 to 10 years to 180 to 90 days. So we've really changed that dramatically. We've gone from a situation where we had 12 laws that pertain to the bankruptcy and the default process, to one where you have just one law, and some of these laws, which were more than 100 years old, have been replaced by a modern 21st century law which is as good as anywhere else in the world. We, of course, hopefully with this law will be able to move up quickly in the World Bank rankings in ease of doing business. So that is also a transformational step. And then finally, through the information utilities, which many honorable members touched on, we are going to go from a situation of very fragmented information, a lack of information and opacity about the bankruptcy and insolvency process, to one where there's a lot of transparency and a lot of knowledge as to what is happening, who's in distress and who's not in distress. And in that sense, we'll be also creating an industry with the bankruptcy board and the insolvency professionals. This is indeed a major transformation. Now on to the clarifications. There are 5 or 6 and I just will go through them very quickly. There was a question that Saugata Roy ji posed about whether the promoter himself can actually trigger a voluntary default. That is indeed possible. They'll be able to do that. And in fact, because of the early warning, Mr. Gala brought up this issue of whether we can get an early warning signal, whether we can get revival in doing it that way with the information utilities. Promoters have the ability to think about a voluntary default and then try and revive their enterprise that way. The other thing that we've done here is that we put employees and workmen right at the top of the waterfall in terms of protection of rights. That was brought up. That was a question several people had. But of course, what we've done is to make sure that workmen, employees who have worked hard for the company, who in many cases have no other means of support, are right on top of the waterfall. There was another question that was asked about why is it that the government comes after employees and secured creditors in this waterfall? And the answer to that is because we want the people to come first. We want the people to come first. With secured creditors, is after all depositor money, it is taxpayers' money, as Satpathy ji was pointing out. Obviously, employees are most dependent, most vulnerable. So we put the most dependent, most vulnerable taxpayer money ahead of the government, which has other abilities, to be able to borrow and so on, so that we put the government next after these two very important creditors in the waterfall. There was also a question, Saugata Rai ji pointed out that he's seen many situations where there have been sick companies in West Bengal, and it's unfortunate that West Bengal has had to go through that. I think under the leadership of his party, West Bengal will surely do much better. But what we've done to protect workmen and employees, and this is from the suggestion that came from the joint committee, is to strengthen their salaries from just 12 months to 24 months. So we are really making sure that the most dependent are fully taken care of. As far as creditor rights are concerned, and this was touched on by many speakers, Mr. Gala spoke about it, Mr. Atsal spoke about it, I think Mehtab ji also spoke about it. Of course, they are able to trigger default. And because they are able to trigger default, they can then have significant leverage over promoters, because obviously when the default happens, promoter comes last. And this gives a lot more leverage, transfers the balance of power from promoters to creditors, and in doing so, of course, also strengthens the corporate debt market, so that creditors can then issue debt with a better understanding of the risks that they have to deal with, which means a better pricing of the risk. And we also believe that this will lead to a much broader, deeper, more liquid corporate bond market as well. So it significantly strengthens the corporate debt market. And I have already clarified Mr. Gala's question about why is it that you want personal guarantees. Mr. Gala, the fact is, when you can't enforce bankruptcy as a debt financier, you're going to want to have something like a personal guarantee to be able to enforce your creditor rights. And now the fact that we are going to put in place this very robust bankruptcy process hopefully will reduce the need for personal guarantees, because you'll be able to recover your debt, your loans in the bankruptcy process. So this is in fact dealing with that problem that you have brought up. Then several members asked about information utilities. Why is it that we need information utilities? Satpathy Sahab spoke about it, Kavita ji spoke about it as well. The reason is, as I said earlier, is we have a very fragmented, opaque insolvency bankruptcy process that is scattered across many different legislations, many different adjudicating authorities. By putting in place these well-regulated information utilities, and by forcing people to deliver information to these information utilities, we will have transparency in terms of who is borrowing, how much is borrowing, what is their exposure across the system, and everybody who wants early warning signals to understand who could potentially be in distress, whether willful default is happening. By having these information utilities, we prevent these kinds of situations. And of course, honorable members should know that these information utilities will be regulated by the bankruptcy board, which will be a very eminent board with very capable professionals, very eminent people, and therefore we are quite confident that this transparency that we need in these situations will in fact come about. Finally, there were a lot of members that spoke about willful defaulters. Of course, Papu Yadav ji spoke about it, but Atsal ji spoke about it, Satpathy ji spoke about it, Kavita ji spoke about it, Yadav ji spoke about it. Everybody, of course, like all of us in government, wants to avoid people operating as willful defaulters, taking money from our banks, and then either diverting it into other purposes, siphoning it away, or not paying when they can pay. These are the definitions that RBI already uses for identifying willful defaulters. So that framework is in place right now. Willful defaulters are being identified. Previously, in a question that I answered in this August House some days ago, I explained that over 7,000 willful defaulters have been identified. Cases have been filed, FIRs have been filed. The process for identifying willful defaulters and going after them, taking criminal action, is very well defined. It is a parallel process from the bankruptcy process, and they will both continue to operate as we would like. Finally, Mr. Gogoi wanted to know why is it that we are not able to create more jobs. We are in fact creating jobs. A lot of jobs are being created in the informal sector through initiatives such as Mudra, what we're doing in construction and public investment and so on. But I'd like to conclude by reminding Mr. Gogoi that it is precisely this type of transformational legislation, these kinds of very important building blocks of our economy, which once they are brought in will enable the kind of creative destruction that Mr. Gala was talking about, companies to be able to get going quickly, to wind up quickly, for creditors and investors to invest fearlessly, and it is that type of friction-free market performance, market processes that will enable the creation of these jobs. And with that, I think all of us will, honorable members will join me in supporting this legislation, this very transformational legislation. Thank you very much.